Can Shang Tsung be redeemed? A question that's come up more and more in my mind as of late, partly because lots of people ask for or toy around with this idea of a redemption arc for this putrid sack of pus. I think the best place to start would be Mortal Kombat Deception, since the newer MKs give you less breathing room for something like this. MK9 Shang quickly gets disintegrated, MK11 and MK12 have too much Shang to the point where people got sick of him, whereas Deception does kill Shang off, but he comes back just one game later, and this all comes after a long list of games where he's just kinda there and doesn't get much development, so he's an almost completely blank slate to write stuff on, plus the 3D era has just more lore tools to play around with, but this is all just a backdrop. We can, for all intents and purposes, amalgamate all Shangs into one, or you can use what follows for whichever Shang is your favorite, it doesn't really matter. Let's start at the moment of his death, which seems counterintuitive, but you'll see what I mean. Shang basically dies when Raiden sacrifices himself at the beginning of Deception, but Shang being Shang, most of him survives, meaning, well, this will get trippy. Basically, most people have one soul, and when that soul goes, they go. Shang has thousands of souls within him, potentially more. Who knows how many? He's been alive for a staggering amount of time. Now, normally when you're a conglomerate of souls, you resemble something like Ermac. Not a single individual, but rather a multifaceted, complex, quasi-godlike being possessed of untold levels of enlightenment, and in the case of Ermac, untold turmoil as well, from all the different souls vying for control and disagreeing with each other and interrupting each other like it's a Jubilee Surrounded episode. But Shang is pretty bad at sharing, so instead of letting all the souls within him stay fully sentient or try to reform as such, he keeps them at bay and uses them as just raw soul energy. Think of a batter that you have to stir constantly to avoid clumps or curdles from forming. That's what Shang does to make sure all these souls stay just soul matter and they don't clump up into something more, causing him split personality issues or something. This way you keep all the skills and knowledge without potentially being taken over by some soul glitch or aberration. But that also means that when someone like Shang dies, a part of him may die, along with some of the souls he's collected, while some other bits and pieces may escape and haunt the land for a time, or all of Shang could die, and all the souls he entrapped would be freed, or everything could die, or any variation in between. Now, one of Shang's many buffs and enchantments that he placed on himself long ago is kind of a failsafe that ensures a particular such variation happens in the event of his death. Namely, all the souls he's ever stolen die, and his own original soul survives. His entire physical form got completely incinerated by Raiden's God Blast, and what normally happens when you die is what's left of your soul trickles away into the Netherrealm, where it gets ground into a paste over millennia and eventually disappears. But in this case, because of that enchantment, Shang's disembodied soul, his conscious mind and identity, survived. So he used his many other souls as a buffer. A body double, a fake, a substitution jutsu, if you will. Much like Sauron, his physical form was destroyed, but his spirit endured. Which, by the way, this was always one of the few cool parts of MK Legacy Season 2 that I wish they had explored some more. When Liu Kang and Shang Tsung meet in that diner, they reminisce about how Liu decapitated Shang on their last encounter or some such shit, and how that was a good show, nice move. Too bad Shang's immortal though, so he just grew it back. There's an implication there on being able to use souls you've stolen to replenish and reincarnate yourself, which is a potentially cool mechanic to explore. Anyway, Shang still wound up in the Netherrealm, but his soul, his essence, his personality were fully intact, to the point where the Netherrealm itself recognized it as foreign. Because normally dead souls invariably go to the Netherrealm and cannot escape, whereas living creatures that by definition do not belong in the Netherrealm aren't allowed passage into it, need special means of travel to get there, and even then are treated as foreign irritants there by the realm and its forces, as established in Mortal Kombat mythologies. So Shang cheated the system somewhat, but the biggest question is, why? Why do this? Not Shang, I mean me. Why cheapen death yet again and bring an MK character back for the quadrillionth time, making everyone roll their eyes over how death once again doesn't matter in this fucking series, something I often criticize it for, and thus doing something like this would render me a hypocrite for it? Well, first of all, you don't have to do this. I am and always have been perfectly fine with Shang dying in the beginning of Deception and staying dead. He had starred in plenty of games up to that point, he had his due, and it made sense to kill him off, albeit a bit unceremoniously, but also somewhat appropriately, him turning out to be nothing more than a bug on a windshield for a Raiden that's ready to lay his life on the line. But then if you are to try and work and improve on this character in the context of the original timeline, you have precious few options at your disposal, this kind of resurrection being one of them. You can't really modify his part before Deception much. It works well as is, and to make an essay titled Shang Tsung's Redemption or The Real Shang Tsung or anything remotely close to that, you're stuck trying to make something of him post-Deception, which means his survival in some capacity. And then there's the even deeper problem of what exactly to do with him, because there's only so many avenues you can take with a character like this that, in the eyes of many, kind of feels played out and overused, rightfully so. But fans have correctly identified that one of like 2, maybe 3 options is to toy around with a redemption arc, whether successful or not. Because as much as anything close to redemption sounds just unbelievably obnoxious and gay for a character like this, there isn't much else to do with him, apart from writing a dastardly good part for him as unapologetically evil and psychopathic, like Dark Knight worthy. But we've kinda had that flavor to death for like 2+ decades. It's also kind of comical to even entertain the idea that an ancient, putridly evil creature that caused so much suffering without a second thought, killed so many, tortured and consumed so many souls, and served some of the most evil empires and warlords in the known universe, that redemption is even possible in any universe, let alone deserved, for such a base, vile, steaming pile of ancient shit, a true moral septic tank of mutant excrement that's so far gone it might as well be considered less than an animal. But this con is also the idea's selling point because, I mean, think about it, this is a very interesting topic. Never mind Shang Tsung, the question itself in a vacuum. Is redemption possible for anyone regardless of how far they've fallen? And if it is, should such unbelievably putrid ex-criminals ever be allowed to reform, even if they can? It's a very interesting quandary. And from a storytelling perspective, resurrection is bad in a vacuum because it kills the rules and consistency of the story and it doesn't mirror reality at all, but it can become justified if it's used as an opportunity for some compelling character work or story crafting, if it's an excuse for that. All that said, I want to be clear, what follows isn't necessarily a redemption story or non-redemption story or anything cut and dry like that. It's a goose. It's just a thing that was written because it could potentially be interesting without thinking too much on how the thing would be labeled. I make the things, you put the labels, however you wish. Oh, and by the way, in case any of you were wondering, yes, Shao Kahn would have a similar failsafe built in, since he's an even bigger soul repository than Shang is. Does he also need to do the soul-stirring thing to avoid soul clumps from forming, because that's potentially lame for such a powerful character? Technically, yeah, he would need to do it, but keep in mind that Shao isn't human, and depending on the game or piece of media in question, is implied to be a deity or at least of comparable power levels in physiology, so soul would likely bend to his will much more easily, whereas Shang is just a normal human. They're galaxies apart in terms of raw ability, which now that I think of it, this creates a natural hierarchy of soul-based baddies in the mythos. At the low end you have Shang, who's just a human and took soul mastery to the absolute highest levels a mortal human can achieve. Then you have Shao, who's not conventionally mortal and possesses a level of raw power so far beyond your average mortal that he can strip an entire realm of its souls and down them the way Grandpa downs whiskey. And then at the highest tier, you have Onaga, whose penchant for soul manipulation is so great it's built in. It's biological, like a living incarnation of soul magic itself, able to raise entire armies from the dead with but a thought, not to mention bringing himself back from the dead. His right to power was truly divine. When you analyze his abilities, the whole ancient Chinese-style emperor with a divine right to rule bit starts to make more and more sense for his character flavor. In the face of the Dragon King, everyone else, even Shao Kahn, they're all but pretenders. cheap imitations of the real thing. But anyway, it's funny because I always say that the theme of deception, of fully realized Mortal Kombat deception, should be resurrection. Onaga getting resurrected, the heroes dying and getting resurrected, the undead army, the undying Havoc skulking about, trying to get his hands on Onaga's heart, which holds the ability to resurrect people, Liu Kang getting raised from the dead, Raiden coming back as Dark Raiden, the threat of the One Being getting resurrected. All of deception should be one big reckoning, the past coming back to claim its due from the present. And given that thematic, Shang going through his own modest little resurrection and reckoning in the corner is pretty in line with this. So where do you even begin with this monumental fool's errand of trying to redeem this rancid sack of shit? Well, step 1, the absolute first thing you need to do is saddle Shang Tsung with an impossibly powerful being that's completely beyond him. Essentially God. Like imagine God himself putting a leash on Shang Tsung and making him his bitch. But more importantly, and in keeping with the classic cultural perception of God, it has to be someone that's A, impartial to Shang, and B, completely beyond Shang's level of existence. Obviously beyond his power level, but also beyond his comprehension of what is and isn't possible, who plays a completely different ballgame compared to Shang, like a game of power and influence that makes Shang's schemes and worldview look like those of an ant by comparison, and who's beyond him in terms of knowledge, wisdom, has a completely different take on morality that's alien to every other character you've ever met. He's just on another level of existence. Both of these exclude guys like Shao Kahn. That and the fact that he's already been a thrall to Shao for countless centuries and it hasn't really improved his outlook on life. It also excludes gods like Raiden who have a personal vendetta against Shang and just too much history with him to be neither willing nor able to affect any sort of change in Shang. So gods are off the table, Khans are off the table. Who could it be? Amusingly enough, the answer has been sitting in plain sight for a couple minutes as I already mentioned him. The Dragon King himself, Onaga. Well, not this Onaga, because this Onaga, as he exists in the deception game we have, is more or less kaiju angry, kaiju smash. I have a very ambitious vision for Onaga, which will obviously be its own video, but it's one that sees him become a very different type of villain, if you can call him that. Yes, you can definitely call him that, but that's kind of the point. His divinity is so magnificent that he sways the hearts of all but the most resilient of subjects. And by the way, if you thought of a different god tier being to pair Shang with, let me know below, I'm curious. Anyway, what ends up happening is Shang goes through this entire journey trying to crawl his way out from the putrid depths of the Netherrealm, just narrowly managing to do so and regain some kind of meager physical form. A far cry from his full strength, just a meager vessel that nonetheless he will make do with for the time being. And after all that clawing and trudging and that whole extraordinary journey to make it back to the realm of the living, he has the legendary misfortune of coming face to face with Onaga. Fuck. Now to an ancient being like Onaga who's been dead for millennia, Shang obviously means nothing. He means nothing to him, he's just a cockroach to be stepped on. What's funny is Shang doesn't recognize Onaga, even though he just fought him before he died, tried to fight him, more like tickled him. But he doesn't recognize him because after that harrowing journey from the Netherrealm, we're not quite sure what came out the other side. And he's also in this lesser form, and his powers, his perceptions, and his memories have holes in them. So he's like, this will rejuvenate me nicely. And Onaga disintegrates him. Just straight up crushes him with a gesture, without even stopping, in what would be one of the most comical deaths in the series. But then he stops thinking, oh, maybe the insect I just crushed could have some useful information, and with another gesture, he revives the sorcerer, like it's nothing. Fully revives. This Shang smells like a brand new car, full coat of paint and everything. No longer a lesser version of himself, Shang instantly recognizes the juggernaut in front of him, the fact that he just died and the error of his ways, and bows before the Dragon King for fear of his life. As soon as Onaga finished his interrogation and looked like he was about to put the now useless sorcerer out of his misery again, permanently, Shang's like, you'll never take me alive, and Onaga kills him again, and then revives him again. and does it again for good measure. Kill, revive, till he puts the fear of God in him. It becomes clear through visual storytelling that Onaga never cared enough to kill Shang in the first place until he attacked the Dragon King. But now things were out of Shang Tsung's hands. Onaga merely had to stand and look down upon the sorcerer, and Shang knew he was now a lowly thrall to the former ruler of Outworld. Shang followed Onaga around like a lowly servant, and whenever he would hesitate or think of running away, Onaga would just stare him down almost like he read his mind, and Shang instantly abated. Not a single command was given for the longest time. Onaga held court over vast territories for entire game's worth of content, and Shang was always there by his side, like a pathetic slave or a glorified cupbearer. And the king would not say a word to him, just expect him to stand there by his side and shut up. Until finally, at one point, he addressed Shang Tsung and asked him a question about Earthrealm, and why, after many attempts, his former master didn't manage to merge it with Outworld. He would ask one more question about Earthrealm's leadership and how it's structured, then move on. And Shang finally mustered the courage to ask why he's there. Is Onaga keeping him as a pet? Is there some other purpose to this? And it turns out that Shang is one of the few that retains his free will in front of the one true emperor of Outworld, and soon of all the realms. You see, Onaga has this aura of divinity about him, one that makes lesser creatures bow down to his greatness almost instantly, whereas stronger individuals take some time. Basically Jedi mind trick aura. Shang was, as of yet, rebellious enough of mind and spirit to be considered a quaint, quirky curiosity by the Dragon King. Shang would try to escape, manipulate, or outright defy his new overlord multiple times, and he would get killed and revived for it every single time, in increasingly cruel, creative, painful, and sometimes morbidly funny ways. Each time with his whole self restored, body and mind and memories and all, despite conventional wisdom stating that would be almost impossible. The might of the Dragon King was truly something to behold. And yet, in spite of this, Shang couldn't shake the feeling that there was something missing, that some part of him was somehow gone, and his mind kept drifting to that failsafe spell that kept him alive and wound him up in this mess in the first place. What if the enchantment didn't work the way it was fully intended to? Perhaps along with the many souls he possessed, a part of his own soul was also lost permanently. He could feel some differences in the way he acts, the thoughts he has, and the powers he has access to compared to his old self. This dreadful thought of loss consumed him more and more, and it becomes a turning point for his character as he, in spite of himself, starts to make decisions him and all of us normally wouldn't expect to see. On top of that, he starts to remember more and more things from his youth. You have to understand, Shang Tsung as we know him in the lore is so old and so unbelievably wicked and corrupted and deformed from all the lives he's lived and all the souls he's leeched that he's barely even human anymore. He's so ancient he barely has any memory of the human he once upon a time probably used to be. And yet now, partly because all the excess souls were stripped of him, memories from a bygone life start flooding in again. It's also implied to be partly because his long-standing soul addiction is now cured. He really is just a mortal again, human like the rest of us. This would work wonders as a spin-off game, exploring essentially what MK Conquest did. The rivalry between Shang and the great Kung Lao, Shang's past as a human and former Earthrealm fighter, his fall from grace. You can also do just flashbacks to it in the main thing, but a full-on game focusing on that would be money, and that would heighten the impact of his overall arc that much more. And the funny thing is, despite Shang's convictions that clearly some crucial part of himself died and it's warping his personality and memories of regret and loss, Onaga ultimately reveals that no such thing happened. That the Dragon King restored his full self down to the finest of details, and it becomes clear that Shang's perceived warped nature is just a result of him being human again, unadulterated by all the power and the souls he used to have access to. A lesson on power and corruption. Power does not inherently corrupt, as the Dragon King explains, but over the course of centuries, even the strongest wills erode. This also becomes somewhat ironic coming from Onaga in the grand context of things, how Onaga too, despite his awesome might, gets oh so subtly influenced by the one being bit by bit. But as for Shang, he gets to stay by Onaga's side as he forms alliances with various realms and factions through pure speechcraft, intelligence, charisma, and sheer dominating presence. He gets a front row seat on how to truly rule, as opposed to the unrefined bullying of the realms that his former master was so proficient at. Onaga sees Shang for what he is, a misguided pawn and former addict, without having any kind of history or connection to him, which is why this pairing works so well. He is, for all intents and purposes, the audience, the writer, and the collective consciousness of everything, God, if you will, looking down on him and exposing his very soul. Someone you cannot defeat, escape, nor argue with in any way. This pairing also works thematically because Shang has spent centuries desperately trying to cheat death and claw his way to the very teat of life, while Onaga is a symbolic depiction of both life and death, the sorcerer's most coveted desire and his greatest fear personified in the same entity, the perfect figure to humble the great Shang Tsung. Shang is forced into the position of being useful to the Dragon King or die, again and again, and then try again. Without the Dragon King asking anything of him, Shang eventually starts offering to do things for him, run errands, make pacts and allegiances with various groups, problem solve, offer insight into foreign realms. In spite of himself, he becomes a different kind of monster entirely, one not driven by passion, but by utility, worth, service, the other side of the masculine coin. He wasn't doing it to ensure his survival. No, we're long past that. Onaga had killed and resurrected him so many times, Shang felt like he was in limbo. Reality itself seemed hazy to him. Death, and on the other end of it, survival, now carried far less meaning to him. The things that currently truly drove the sorcerer were far more mysterious to him, but that would be far more obvious to a more spiritual man than he. Shang Tsung was achieving that sense of detachment that always eluded him as an Earthrealm fighter in his youth. A detachment that his passion always got in the way of, and later turned into addiction to power. Basically, this is the Mortal Kombat version of rehab. It may yet be possible for this twisted mirror image of the series' main hero to more closely resemble the real thing. One fun scene could involve the negotiation of the Netherrealm's complete and immediate surrender, with Shang on one side representing Outworld and the Dragon King, and Quan Chi on the other fighting to maintain the Netherrealm's independence. An interesting reunion between two former allies and rivals in which Quan would note that the human sorcerer had changed, one of several such encounters that would make Shang realize how far he had come under the tutelage of Onaga. Far or astray, he still couldn't tell. And with this change, the power dynamic between the two sorcerers also shifted, with Shang better able to outsmart his Netherrealm counterpart. And witnessing Quan Chi after all this time, still playing the same power games and clinging to the same goals that now seemed so provincial to Onaga's chosen, made Shang Tsung feel both superior and angry. Angry not because he used to be like that, but because he still longed to be like that. And that's the toughest part of getting over any addiction, is not physically overcoming it, but more so letting go of the part of yourself that was the addict, essentially killing part of yourself, which we loathe to do. This can be developed further when, during a similar negotiation with Sado that goes horribly wrong, Shang has to fight his way out and gets mortally wounded, like literal chunks of him get sawed off by Satan warriors mid-battle, and he's left with no choice but to soul steal to survive, and thus risk re-triggering his soul addiction. But the true change comes when Shang willingly chooses to absorb another soul, perhaps a very valuable one like Baraicho's, the master who taught many champions including Liu Kang, and stops himself midway through. That would be the true turning point for Shang Tsung, willingly giving up a soul in order to preserve his own. And later on, Onaga would notice this change in his eyes and acknowledge him like never before for it. By the way, another fun scene could be teaming Shang up with someone like Johnny or Cassie on one occasion, against both their will, forced to work together, and the whole trip, Johnny/Cassie's like, dude, you really are the most putrid, like, cesspool of like the absolute most vile sack of shit there ever was, you know that? I mean, you do know that, right? There's some part of you that's at least aware of that. There must be. But like, constantly, relentlessly. Bro, I can't get over how much of a monumental piece of shit. Like, your mother would smother you in shit on your corpse levels of shit. You'd make Hitler's neck hair stand up. Like, he'd lose his lunch if he knew how much of a just base, fucking disgusting subhuman being you are. It's remarkable to an ever more deadpan Shang that has no choice but to take it. That's more so just because it's funny, to add some humorous color to the story's cheeks. Of course, he'd be berated for serving yet another master bent on conquering all of everything, but in his defense, he literally has no choice in the matter. He either serves the Dragon King or dies for a living. Die for a living, lol. As for the climax of his arc, there's a few ways we can play this. One version is he could end up resurrecting Liu Kang. Perhaps he convinces Onaga to do it, fights him, defeats him for the first time, and chooses to not steal his soul despite being allowed to do so. His final test to prove his growth as a character. Or he could choose to save an already revived Liu Kang by attacking someone powerful who was about to kill him, putting his whole might behind a barrage of flame and soul energy. A third option would be standing up to and sabotaging Onaga once the latter starts getting manipulated by the One Being to merge the realms, and destroying himself permanently when cornered by the Dragon King in one big kamikaze attack, having finally understood what to do with the second chance he was given. Ironically, it's to stand up to the being who gave him his second chance and all his growth when he's in the wrong, but this time not out of petty, personal, or emotional reasons, but because it is the correct move to make when viewing the big picture. Free from addiction and passion, in a senseless universe where no thing, path, or decision have any objective value, this is the one move that holds the most weight to the now passionless, enlightened sorcerer, who can no longer hide behind the desire for power as its own goal for its own sake. This third option in particular would be a nice payoff to Onaga's comments about Shang being a strange curiosity, still able to exert his will to an unusual degree in the presence of the Dragon King. And so he did, when it mattered the most. His full potential as a champion of Earthrealm finally realized, moments before his death. Regardless of the specifics, Shang's story should probably always ultimately lead to his demise, and his acceptance of it, acknowledging that even if someone can change dramatically enough to no longer be considered the same person and earn a new life, that's sometimes not good enough in the eyes of the world. And so Shang Tsung ends up undoing what he set in motion in Deadly Alliance by, in some way, saving the champion he previously killed and preserving the realms he previously helped destroy. Let me know what you think of these scatterbrained ideas, what you'd do with Shang, how would you redeem him, would you redeem him, would you let him live or not, and don't forget to like. Special thanks to Jiggly Puff Puff, Thomas Marshall, Serhi Hrishin, Clocks, Juan Bautista Cortez, Gennaro Chanella, Miguel Avila, Blood Milk, as well as my other members for being irresponsible enough with their spending to support the channel.